Now let's move to this theater, which is the so-called CBI theater, which stands for China, Burma, India. Historically, this was a logistical nightmare for both sides because it includes lengthy distances over land, and it is not easy to supply your forces that deep inland. And it remains a nightmare in this game as well for both sides. So, in order to conquer Burma, you have to control these four locations: Rangoon, Mandalay, Lashio, and Midkina. And initially, it might be pretty possible if you use your strong Japanese units to overrun these garrisons and then these Indian garrisons in Rangoon. And notice that it is also important because of the existence of a resource hex here in Rangoon, which is important for the Japanese. But this will most likely take a lot of battles until you manage to eliminate all garrisons from all these hexes, Mandalay, Lashio, and Midkina. And usually the allied player will try to move some units to cover these ones, which, while not particularly strong, they will delay the Japanese advance because the Japanese will have to take battles here and there and possibly fail some dice rolls and further delay their advance. Notice that Burma also includes this airfield of Akyab, but this is not necessary to capture Burma, only these four locations are needed. And of course, if the Allies want to reconquer Burma, they will have to again recapture these four locations. And this is one political will down for the Allies if they lose it, and one political will up if they recapture it. Now, there are some further problems. First of all, this is the only port in range of the rest of Burma, so normally the Japanese have to conquer Rangoon, otherwise if they try to bypass it, then we've got the overland logistical range restriction, which means in order to be in supply you have to be 4 movement points away from a supply eligible port, which is not the case with Bangkok because it is 2, 4 and 6 points. So if the Japanese do not conquer Rangoon, they practically can advance no further, so you have to either amphibiously assault Rangoon or move overland to Rangoon early so that you can conquer it before the Allies can reinforce it. But as you may guess, there's a limit to what you can do as the Japanese player early because you need a lot of activation to conquer stuff here and there, and you have to choose whether to focus on South Pacific and New Guinea and Solomon Islands, or in the neutralization of Philippines and Malaya and Dutch East Indies, or into the CBI theater and specifically into Burma. But when talking about this CBI theater, there's a bunch of things more to be taken into account. This is the special transport route that is not functioning initially. This bridge has not been built. You need to play a special event as a Japanese player, which is the bridge over the river Kwai. And this was a very important bridge logistically for the Japanese in order to be able to transport their forces further into Burma. And of course, there has been a very famous movie about the bridge over the river Kwai. If you have not watched it yet, then you're just like me and you have to watch it as soon as possible. And other than that, if this event is played, it transforms these hexes, which normally require an expenditure of 2 movement points to move from here to there and vice versa, into a transport route, which means you only have to expend half a movement point to reach here. And after that, you can reach Rangoon, if it is not enemy occupied, with an additional half movement point. And after that, your supply situation suddenly becomes much better, because you can use this port to supply your further advance inland, and then you can use all these transport routes to enter further into Burma. There is also an efficiency rating modifier for Japanese headquarters activating units in Burma or northern India, which makes bridge over the river Kwai particularly important. If the Japanese do not control Rangoon and have not built the bridge over the river Kwai, then if their headquarters is activating a unit in Burma or northern India or Ceylon, then its efficiency rating is reduced by 1, which can reduce it down to 0. So its total number of activations is reduced by 1. If they control Rangoon but have not built the bridge over the river Kwai, then the efficiency rating is not reduced. It is as indicated. And if they control Rangoon and have built bridge over the river Kwai, then their efficiency rating of their headquarters activating units in Burma or northern India or Ceylon is increased by 1. So in this case, the south headquarters, if it was playing a card with a logistical value of 4, for example, would have 6 activations because it is 1 for its efficiency rating, 4 for the logistic value, and 1 additional activation for bridge over the river Kwai because they activate a unit around here. And now let's talk about China. These hexes around Kunming are considered China, and no Japanese or otherwise allied unit can enter here. This is only for the Chinese units, so your Chinese units are safe here, but for the most part you want to be moving them outside to help defend the CBI theater. And these 3 Japanese units that, as we have mentioned earlier, might take replacements, and if possible they can be brought back from the dead back into Kunming. And these ones can only operate in China, Burma, and northern India. So Burma reaches all the way to here, so the Chinese units cannot move any further. This is Siam, which is not politically important, but this means that the Chinese units cannot operate here. And if they are forced to move here, they are eliminated. For example, they can only be operating within these hexes of China, Burma, and northern India. When talking about northern India, it is these 5 hexes. And let's also talk about an important logistical feature of this theater, which is the Burma Road. We've got this road, this one, which can either be open or closed. And of course, this is important as well, especially for the allies. When this one is open, this means that these hexes can be moved to or from by using half a movement point. If it is closed, you need 2 movement points to move here and a further 2 to move here because this transport route is closed. Now, I should further add here that besides all the other options that you have with your cards, you can use a card to construct a transport route. The only ones able to be constructed are these 3 in northern India, which is Imphal, Ledo, and Jarhat. The Japanese, if they play a 3 OC value card, and if they can trace a supply through these hexes, they can use a 3 OC value card to construct the Imphal transport route, and only this one, to facilitate their further advance, because now again this costs half a movement point to advance. The Japanese can construct the Imphal transport route only if they can trace a line of communication from Imphal via strategic transport route to a Japanese-controlled Rangoon, provided it is supply eligible. So in this case, for example. The Allies can only construct the transport routes of Jarhat and later Ledo or Imphal if they control the whole of northern India plus Akyab. They can use a 3 OC value card to construct Jarhat. The first one that has to be constructed is Jarhat. And after that, they can construct either Imphal or Ledo by using another 3 OC value card. So, let's come back to the Burma Road. The Burma Road is open if you can trace a valid supply route to Rangoon and then from Rangoon to Madras by sea, or from Rangoon to the map aids, or if you can trace a supply route from Kunming to Madras overland wholly by these or these transport routes. So if you can trace this path or this path, then the Burma Road is open. And of course, if you are controlling Rangoon still, then the Burma Road is open, because you can trace your supply here and then from here to Madras, or from here to the map edge. So if the Japanese conquer Rangoon, your problems as the Allies start to emerge, and you have to possibly construct these transport routes in order for Burma Road to be open. This will facilitate the movement of Chinese troops and will also render Kunming a valid supply source for your units. So as long as Kunming is a supply source, which is possible if Burma Road is open, then these units can trace their supply from Kunming And of course, if the road is open, this means that they are within the logistical range of 4 movement points here. And as an exception to the normal rules, if Kunming is a supply source, you don't need the headquarters to be in activation range. You can just have your units, for example, here within 4 movement points from Kunming, and they are in supply and they can possibly be activated from your headquarters. Now, there is a special event, which is the Chinese airlift, which the Allies historically used, and this had its origins in China. So the Allies used their airplanes from China to supply the troops in the CBI theater. This event activates the so-called hump, which was kind of a hill or mountain place here towards China. And in this case, if the hump is active, it works kind of a substitute for the Burma Road. So we've got this Burma Road status. If it is open, we bring the marker here to Burma Road open. And if it is closed, we bring it here. But if it is closed and the hump has been played, we flip it to this side and it goes here. Now, for the hump to work, the Chinese airlift event has to be played, and the Allies have to be in control of an airfield in northern India, a supply eligible airfield. So, for example, if the Japanese have invaded Dhaka and this one is not supply eligible as a result of that, and of course this one is not supply eligible, now there is no supply eligible airfield in northern India and the Burma Road is closed again. But if they control a supply eligible airfield in northern India and the hump event has been played, we bring this up here. Chinese units suffer attrition normally. So, for example, in this case, because the Burma Road is closed and this unit is out of range of any supply eligible port, it will suffer attrition as normal. And the only way to bring eliminated Chinese units is into Kunming, but this only if Kunming is a supply source. So, for example, if Burma Road is closed and the hump is not active, you cannot bring back your Chinese replacements in Kunming. And if you have nowhere else to spend your replacements are lost for China this turn. Now, this bears a particular importance for China. But first of all, let's talk about India itself. India is divided into 3 parts. We've got mainland India, which is these hexes from Calcutta to Madras, for example, and these hexes, which is Ceylon, and also these 5 hexes, which is northern India. So the Japanese can never enter mainland India. They can enter Ceylon by amphibious assault, and if there is Allied units here in Madras, for example, they can attack from range, using the range from Colombo or Trincomalee or the sea, but they cannot enter the hex itself. Now, as for northern India, they can enter it normally after resolving their supply issues, for example, and possibly conquering Burma. They may want to advance into northern India, and if at the end of a turn, during the US political will segment, they control all these 5 hexes. So, for example, an infantry is here and another one is here, and they move through here 1, 2, 3, and they control all these hexes. At the end of the turn, the India status marker goes from stable to unrest. And if the Allies recapture some of these 5 hexes during the turn, this marker goes back to stable again, regardless of the position it was in. So, if all these hexes are controlled for 4 consecutive turns, India turns into revolt. And this thematically represents that the Japanese are unable to conquer the whole of India, of course, but they can make the Indians unwilling to fight back and revolt against the English rule, and this results in the loss of India for the Allies. But I remind you that if during this step Allies control a hex, then the cycle begins anew from the beginning. And I should have to mention that there is a number of Gandhi events that may push this even faster to revolts. And if at the end of turn this is in revolts, then India falls, and there is a -2 political will for the Allies. And notice that this cannot be regained by the Allies because there are no valid hexes to recapture. It is just the revolt's marker that results in the fall of India. And this has a number of implications. First of all Indian units, so this one, have to be removed from the game. And let's not forget to mention that these ones that have B in their designation, these are Burmese, and they are removed when Burma falls. But if India falls, all these Indian units are removed from the game. And furthermore, all Commonwealth units in mainland China have to exit mainland China because of the Indian revolt. And they can be placed in either Ceylon or Maldives. But if the Japanese have control of Ceylon and the Maldives, they permanently leave the game. The headquarters are involuntarily repositioned and will be re-entering the game as reinforcements. Unlike Commonwealth units, the US ones do not have to be relocated when India falls, but they can do so by treating them like Commonwealth units, so they can be redeployed into Ceylon or Maldives. So for example, suppose the Allies have got these units here. This one will be repositioned to possibly return into Ceylon. This one has to be moved to Ceylon. This one has to be moved to Ceylon, for example. And this one, because it will have no headquarters at the end of turn to supply it, it will also lose one step, for example, and then this one will return into Ceylon. And then the Allies have to return via amphibious assault or possibly ground movement and regain control of these hexes. They are considered as neutral for the remainder of the game until the Allies recapture it. So a smart move by the Japanese would be to first bring the SEAC headquarters out of supply, and this is made by moving possibly an air unit here to place a ZOI over it. But because it can't trace supply from Madras, you also have to bring a unit, possibly a carrier here, and destroy anything that is standing here. And now you have made the SEAC out of supply, and practically the Allies are unable to support India anymore. So if you have control of these hexes, it is just a matter of time before India falls, because no reinforcements will be able to be brought here for the Allies. And if you want to further hurt them, you can try to amphibiously assault Maldives and Trincomalee, and in this way they will permanently lose their units when India falls. Now, back to Burma Road and China. Let's talk about China. Once more, Japanese cannot attack these hexes, and these ones are also considered Allied controlled and occupied for all game purposes. What does this mean? It means that if, for example, the Japanese have reached this far, but the Allies close this path, then the supply tracing for the Japanese cannot pass through these hexes, of course, and it cannot pass through these hexes either, because they are considered Chinese occupied or Allied occupied for this purpose. Other than that, China also consists of these hexes, these coastal ones, which start the game as Japanese controlled, with exception of Hong Kong, which falls during the 1941 turn normally. And these ones are considered to include the Japanese garrison here. The strength of Japanese garrison depends on the Japanese divisions in China track. So if we are on this part, this means the coastal hexes of China are considered to contain 3 Japanese divisions of 9 attack and 12 strength. And if we are from here to here, then it means 2 Japanese divisions on each hex. And from here to here, this is the least possible scenario. We only have 1 Japanese division of 9 attack and 12 defense strength in its coastal hex that contains this red circle or red dot. So the more the Japanese remove their divisions from China, the weaker these hexes become. And let's talk about how China falls. This is done in 2 ways, either by OC offensive or by events. There is a number of events that move the China marker from the stable front towards unstable and major breakthrough and threat of Chongqing and Chongqing falls, and finally government collapse. So the Japanese can play during their turn any number of such events to move it one hex further. And the allies can use an event to bring it back. There is a number of events for the allies as well. However, if the marker is here, they cannot bring it back to stable front by an event unless stated specifically on the events card. But normally this cannot be increased any further for the allies. Now the other way for the Japanese to reduce the China track is by conducted China offensives. This can be done by the use of the 3 OC value card by the Japanese during their turn and at a maximum of once per 2 game turns. So, for example, if we are on turn 2, we can place this marker here as a reminder that the Japanese have conducted a China offensive during turn 2, so they can't do it on turn 3, they can only do it again on turn 4, and you can also use this marker to indicate offensive conducted. And now, how do the China offensives work? We determine the so-called offensive baseline value for the China offensive, which is the strength of the Japanese offensive into China, which is practically the number of Japanese divisions in China. So, for example, in the 1942 scenario, we start with 11 Japanese divisions in China, and as you may recall, you may reduce them during the course of the game to use them as ground replacements. And this offensive baseline value is adjusted by the status of the Burma Road. So if Burma Road is closed, for example, there is no adjustment. If the Burma Road is open, we've got a -8 on our offensive baseline value. And if the Burma Road is closed but the hump is active, we've got a -4. So it goes without saying that when Burma Road is open, it's nearly impossible to succeed your offensive. And when Burma Road is closed, it is much easier, because in order to conduct the China offensive, we roll the 10-sided die, and we have to roll equal to or less than our offensive baseline value. So the simplest example is that if Japanese divisions in China are at 9, and we've got no adjustment due to the Burma Road because it is closed, then whichever result we roll, the China offensive will be a success. So the Allies might try to stabilize China by using the Chinese airlift. Now, let's talk about these ones, air units in China. So, the Allies can place up to 2 air units in the China box, and these air units are considered to be 10 hexes from Tokyo, not for offensive, but for the strategic bombing, which we shall be talking about shortly. And they are considered to be 1 leg distance from any supply eligible airfield in northern India. So from Dhaka or Ledo or Jarhat, for example. These units are in supply here, up to 2 can fit in the China box, and they're in supply if either the Burma Road is open or the hump is active and there is a supply eligible airfield for the Allies in northern India. So every non-long range bomber unit here contributes an additional +1 die roll modifier for the Japanese when rolling for China offensives. So if there are 2 non-long range bomber air units in China, your die roll is modified by +2, and it is even harder to succeed your China offensives. Not to mention, if you fail your China offensives as the Japanese player, and there is at least 1 unit here that contributed its die roll modifier in the China box, then not only do you fail to move the China marker here, but you also move it to the opposite direction, towards the stable front, but never into the stable front position itself. An exception to that is that the 14th Air Force long-range bomber contributes its die roll modifier just like any other air unit. If they are in supply, they may be placed directly into the China box as reinforcements. In order to activate the air units in China box, the activating headquarters has to be able to trace an activation line to Kunming, or if the hump is active, to a supply eligible northern Indian airfield. If these air units are out of supply, they do not provide their modifier for the China offensives, They suffer attrition normally, but they are never eliminated due to attrition. Finally, if China surrenders, they are moved to the turn track to later re-enter game as reinforcements. If the Allies gain control of the Chinese coastal hex, these intrinsic garrisons, the 9 attack and 12 defense divisions, are the last one ground hexes to ever be eliminated in the hex. But they're not permanently eliminated because if the Japanese later regain control of the hex, they are considered to be present again in the coastal hexes. And in the unlikely case that the Allies capture all Chinese coastal hexes, these ones with the red dot, then the Japanese player can no longer remove divisions from China in order to reinforce their ground units as replacements, and they can no longer conduct China offensives. When the China track reaches this level, government collapsed, China immediately falls and it does not wait for the national status segment. And of course, this cannot be undone for the rest of the game. And when this happens, all Chinese units on the map are permanently eliminated from the game. This does not indicate a Japanese conquest of China, which of course would be impossible, but it represents that China has become so unstable by the Japanese efforts and the Chinese civil war that it cannot maintain its combat capability for any longer for the war.